The Shelley poem, Hymn to Intellectual Beauty, I believe it's called, is many things to many people. To me, it describes the indifferent, disinterested power of God, an unseen power that moves unseen among us. They don't watch over us. They are like massive sharks constantly moving, they plural, moving slowly through the ocean, and we are pilot fish hanging on, riding the great gravity of the God's power, accessing it now and again if we are attuned and trained to try. The shark has no awareness of us. This extra invention, the caring God that gives us touchdowns and other stuff we pray for and creates enemies that are not there that we must hunt and kill, maybe is comforting to the masses. I don't know. I can't find another word for it, but it takes from our achievement. That line again, it takes from us. It is undemocratic. This is long and winding, tough. I would say in semi-conclusion, respect the impulse of the Mamdani voter and the Reform voter. They are both responses to disturbance. Shelley's awful power is scary but vital to life. It, like the shark, must be respected. I think that every communist, fascist, and capitalist wants to latch on to the eternal power moving unseen among us. Shelley says, among us all. Good lad. The club is not exclusive. Yeah, I was thinking today as I was driving, this problem we have with minorities, let's say women, or I was listening to Camille Paglia whining on about the feminists. I'm listening to her and I'm going, the thing here is that if you take me, if you take my community, the background that I come from, not my father, he was a very gracious person, but if you take several exemplars of Churchill, for instance, their attitude towards the world was absolutely them on top. It's the famous Churchill story that he shouts at his secretary, behind every great man. He shouts at his secretary or somebody who's taking dictation from him because she's lost the track or whatever it is. And she responds, she says, "Don't ever shout at me like that." And he said, why are you angry with me? What are you doing? What's wrong with you? And she said, "Well, you just shouted." And he said, "Well, I'm a great man." I mean, I liked the guy. I think he was cuddly in the Gary Oldman kind of a way, but that's the attitude of my church, my civilization. And it could be a nice, gentle, nurturing, paternalistic one that you poor darlings, of course you are inferior, but I care for you, aren't I marvelous? That's the good end. The other end was brutal. It was slave owning and slave beating and slave raping and all that sort of stuff, whether the slave was a slave or the slave was a serf. So when some feminists or some lesbian feminist, as Paglia was complaining about, starts off on something, I do think right off, I think, well, give her some time. She's new to this. She's new to the possibility of this arrogance, and she's maybe on some level, she's aping the master, and the aping of the master will pass. I remember when I was at drama school, we had tremendously charismatic teachers, real charisma. Mamdani is charming. Charisma is dangerous. You can't be a dangerous politician. Well, we have one, but charisma is another deal. Anyway, he was a very distinctive way of speaking. Christopher Fettes, glorious human being who died very recently in his 90s. But anyway, we'd work with him, and then we'd go and we'd work with directors from the directors class who were our peers, the same age, and within minutes, within hours, within days, they would be doing their Christopher impersonation. In other words, They were aping the master, and I think that that's a big thing. And it does in a culture not geared towards individuation. I heard some idiot talking about, the British were terribly, individualistic. And I'm going, individualism in the individualistic person is trivial. They're empty. They're shallow. It's not individuated. It's two different things. So anyway, so there are these young lads copying Christopher Fettis, and I see a lot of that around. I see a lot of people copying, aping what they think is management, boss ownership behavior, and it goes back thousands of years. So anyway, part of the thing that I find amusing about somebody like Camille Paglia responding to what she would disdain as identity politics or something like that is that massive numbers of the human race have never played that game. They've never done that role play. You see, acting again, it's very, very useful where you suddenly get to be the master. You get to have, and the problem here is that we historically make a big deal out of our very gracious masters. We create fictions about them and stuff like that. But by and large, they were an insufferable, arrogant lot. I have a famous story of meeting Prince Charles years and years ago. Now that was a deeply gracious human being. Briefly, I met him, and he probably still is. But they buy into the fact. White men have bought into the fact, and have the literature to back them up, that they are God's gift. Made in His image. So. So that their attitude towards the rest of humanity, especially people we now, or Paglia would refer to, even she would call minorities, was horrible. And that they might be striking back a little bit is something that it really doesn't bother me. One hopes, because I do know that in my encounters with angry people on that level, is that because they're so new to it, there remains a kind of humanity. That humanity is gone or has been driven out by educational institutions and by the fiction we call history and all kinds of things. Somebody posted the other day about Lord of the Flies. And of course, schoolboys and girls are asked to read this story, and they say, you see, this is a great moral tale, that if a bunch of young chaps, I can't remember how, 19 or something there were shipwrecked, and they basically turn into Stalin, they basically purge and execute and become horribly dictatorial. William Golding, I think, wrote the novel. And several decades later, there was a real event, but they were not. But anyway, the boys in Golding's story are public schoolboys. Public schoolboys. Look it up. What that means in England. It means privately educated, Eton and Harrow, on their way to Parliament or being lords and all the rest of it. An insufferable lot. So of course they end up behaving in this way. The real incident, there was an incident 20 or 30 years after the fiction of boys being shipwrecked from New Zealand, I think. So I'm not sure what the background, what the demographic of these boys was, but they did the opposite. They were incredibly, they collaborated and cooperated, and they did very well and survived, and they're still friends to this day. So that's an example of, what we're still dealing with. I listened to this chap today talking about, this marvelous thing, the British were much more individualistic. And I'm going, yeah, and look what happened, right? Look at the disaster that leads to.